I think that's why you're only ever as happy as your least happy child, because you're always kind of thinking about them and worrying about them. And of course, a parent's worry is very irritating to a child. They don't want you to be irritated. They don't want your worry as well as their own.
Hello and welcome to Separate Bathrooms. I'm Daddo.
I'm Daddo.
We want to thank you for tuning in. We are grateful for all the downloads and the feedback. If you're new to Separate Bathrooms, there's a whole bunch of episodes covering a whole spectrum of topics. We've been really fortunate to have wonderful guests that have opened our eyes to many things, haven't we?
It's true. And if you want to go through the back catalogue, there's a bunch of great guests. There's a bunch of great relationship therapists and some funny people. Some tears have been had. But, if you want to rate and review us, we'd love that as well. Only if it's good though, right? Can we say that part? Can we say that in small print? No. But we would love you to rate and review us as well if possible.
Isn't it funny how you can get 50 positive comments and one clunker?
Oh.
And the only one you remember is the clunker.
Oh, it's so terrible.
I've been away on the road for a few weeks. The house was a little emptier than usual.
Yeah.
How was that for you?
It was really weird.
Oh, I thought you were just going to say it's really good.
Look, there were times it was good because I've been needing some space just to it's been very, very busy of late for me, busier than normal. So, but yeah, I had 2 nights in a row where no one was in the house except for me. I was all on my own on a Friday and Saturday night.
And how was that?
It was weird. I kind of liked it, but then I was like, I feel really lonely now. I feel like, where is everyone? So, and it was funny because it was River, our 2 kids were together and with Riv's boyfriend Locke. So they were all having fun together, and Bodes was with her friend, and you were in Italy or something. And it was like, okay, I think I might make myself some scrambled egg for dinner and watch Stranger Things. So it was, I don't know, it was
not
nice.
A bad night.
It was not a bad night. It was not a bad night, but it was weird. It would take some getting used to if that was the permanent way. For sure. And I was glad to say it wasn't the permanent way right now, just because it's not what I'm used to. It's not that it's a bad thing to be on your own, but it was just different for me. So
it wasn't pop a bottle of champagne and chockies and sit there and
There may
I was going to say a whole bunch of things then, but they were all completely inappropriate.
There may have been a couple of those 2 nights of Nana's apple and blackberry pie with whipped cream.
There you go.
On my own. There definitely may have been that happening. Yeah, so in that weirdness of feeling, I couldn't help but think, wow, this is going to be us in however long, where it is just you and I, where we will have an empty house all the time. So
is that okay for you?
Yeah, it is, because as long as I've got the children close enough by that I can talk and see them as much as I can. I mean, that may not happen. They may move to another country. Who knows?
Hawaii looks good right now.
Yeah. But which is so great why we have this author and researcher, Celia Dodd, coming in. She's written a book about nurturing relationship with your adult children and how that's going to look once they've moved out of home and they become married and they become parents themselves, and what all that means and all the intricacies of the challenges and the good bits and the hard bits. So I'm really excited to talk to her about that.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's bring the author of All Grown Up, Nurturing Relationships with Adult Children into the bathroom, Celia Dodd.
So Celia, I actually haven't seen a book on this topic, so I'm really excited to talk to you about this. We've got 3 kids of our own. 2 of them are adults. 1 has already left the nest. But what was it about this particular topic that made you want to write this book?
Well, I did write a book about the empty nest, which was published about 11 years ago. It was updated last year. And after I wrote that, a lot of parents said to me, well, the empty nest, okay, that was a bit tough, but what came next was even tougher in lots of ways because, or not so much tough, but complicated. You know, they said, I had no idea how flexible and adaptable I was going to have to be. I had no idea all the changes that would be ahead. And, you know, there are so many, I've got 3 adult children myself. Mine are amazingly in their 30s, all in their 30s, 3 in their 30s. So I was very aware that it gets better in lots of ways, the relationship with adult kids, when you're not having to look after them all the time and, you know, they become adults and you have a more equal relationship. But alongside that, there's all the layers of the past and your parenting from the past. And, you know, the fact that they were once a child whose nappy used to change. You know, it used to be the little boy who used to cry when you went to work, now doesn't call you, or he only calls you up when he wants something. So that's really why. But it was this feedback I kept getting from parents. Parents kept saying to me, you know, that's not as difficult as when they find a partner or when they have kids, or there are so many other steps ahead.
You mentioned in the introduction of the book that the relationship between the parent and the child, as you say, it has a huge impact on well-being and how the parents feel about themselves. Can you explain that a little more?
Well, yeah, that was a bit of research that came out of university in America in March this year. And it was basically saying that, you know, if you have good relationships with your adult children, it affects your whole physical and psychological well-being, which I suppose makes perfect sense. But obviously the flip side of that is that if you don't have a good relationship, if they don't kind of reflect your values, or, you know, you have lots of disagreements, or your kids have a lot of problems, then of course is really bad for your well-being. You know, it's not good. And I mean, it interests me to think about whether it works the other way around. You know, whether, you know, parents' well-being is very deeply affected by their kids. You know, there's that saying, you're only ever as happy as your least happy child, which, and I'm afraid it's really true, but I'm not sure if it works the other way for kids. I think kids could just get on. They're not so affected by if their parents are unhappy. So I think that points to a slight power imbalance that is also at the crux of the relationship. I think that, you know, that they don't have to see you if they don't want to. So I think that's a really interesting piece of research. I think it's great that it's the relationship with adult children is being taken very seriously now, increasingly seriously, because it's a lifelong relationship. It's going to last, hopefully, for, you know, several decades longer than with life expectancy increasing. You know, we could have 6 decades on the planet together, which is amazing.
I was having this conversation with Dad this morning, and he reminded me that of all the adults in our family, every parent is still alive. So when my dad's 90, I'll be 60, our kids will be 30. And you've got this, you know, amazing generational thing happening. We all get along. What happens, Celia, if someone moves out and they're not getting along? Can you repair a relationship after the kids have moved out? Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's all kinds of things you can do. I think the main thing is to keep communication going, as long as there's a bridge, you know, that things don't collapse completely, you can carry on building from it. And I think after children leave, I mean, you know, some of them don't leave until, you know, they're late 20s or even 30s. I think things do get easier when you're both leading separate lives, and there are all kinds of opportunities to rebuild the relationship as long as the relationship evolves, and as long as parents we're ready to be flexible and we're not just stuck in some kind of old relationship we had and with the kids and thinking of them as little children. You know, sometimes you hear parents talking to their kids as if they were little children. I mean, I'm afraid we all do it, you know. It's quite hard to resist sort of telling them off or something. I mean, I found myself wagging my finger at my daughter not long ago, you know, sort of like that. And she just said, look at yourself, Mum. And it was a real wake-up call, actually, because I realised I was still back in that kind of olden times, when she was 8 or something. It was not appropriate anymore. So I think there's all kinds of things you can do. And I think if you have got a difficult relationship, I think if you can just keep meeting, keep the opportunities to meet open, and maybe just do things like go for a walk instead of it all being a big deal, or just keep suggesting nice things that they'll be interested in. And I'm afraid parents have always got to be the grown-up. You've got to take the initiative. You can't sulk with your child. You've got to you've got to be the one who's prepared to question themselves and think about ways that you can move things forward, I think.
I am the youngest of 3 sisters, and it's so fascinating to me that whenever the family gets back together again, and immediately the family dynamics go back to the way it was when we were kids.
Yeah.
I was the messy one. I was the one that was late, and I'm still labelled that, even though I'm not messy anymore, and I'm not always late. Not always. If I'm with you, I'm always late.
Oh.
But yeah, it's so fascinating to me how those dynamics don't really change. We can't seem to kind of shake that label as we get older.
No, I totally agree. And I think for parents, I have to really guard myself with that. That my son isn't clumsy anymore. I've been making a joke about him not being able to pour a glass of squash without spilling it for years, and I suddenly realised how inappropriate is that.
Right.
He's a surgeon, for goodness sake. Of course he's not clumsy. So, I think it's very interesting what you say about when siblings get together, everyone starts behaving like a toddler again, or they certainly go back into their old roles. And I don't know what you can really do about that. I think as parents, as I say, you can sort of question those roles and think about, well, they're no longer appropriate, and so maybe that can help to change the family dynamic when people get together. But and maybe siblings have to sort of look at each other in a new light as well.
Yeah, in a fresh light.
Yeah.
In different cultures, you have families that stay in the house purposely, multi-generational families that all stay living in the house, with grandmother. And is there any research on that? I guess, is that just more a cultural thing? Do you find, is there more of a benefit to that, or is that more challenging in its own way as well?
Well, I think it depends on the individual circumstances. Certainly in the UK, multi-general households are increasing. I mean, they're still just like 1%, but it's the fastest growing kind of household here. So there's a real interest because of the kind of the need for support, with childcare or whatever. And I think families just generally are growing closer. So I think if it's handled well, it can be a real benefit to have that kind of extended family. I do know someone in my book who she describes the relationship with her son, lives sort of right there with her under the same roof. She says, but they sort of treat each other as kind of neighbours, almost like neighbours. So they're very respectful of their space. They don't assume, they don't make assumptions that, son doesn't make assumptions that mum's going to babysit. Mum doesn't make assumptions that he's always going to be ready to have a cup of coffee. They just they respect their boundaries within the household, and I think it can work really well. I think it's great for the grandkids. Everyone. It's a win-win.
Yeah.
It's mutually supportive, but obviously, could be very tense.
Yeah.
It depends
true.
on how you handle it.
Celia, usually the teen years with kids gets the bad rap. Was it a surprise to find the difficulties that children and parents have with each other after they move out?
Yeah, to me it was a surprise actually, because I did find personally the teenage years quite difficult. Having two teenage sons growing up in London was not, was not a picnic. And I think I expected the relationship to somehow almost stop when they left home.
Right.
I didn't really expect to have much of a relationship with them. So, I wasn't prepared for difficulties. And I think it's not comparable for me to the teenage years, which are so intense, and you're so, you're really parenting and you're really trying to,
keep them alive
to make
half
things
the time.
okay. Exactly. No, exactly. So obviously you're at a distance, and I think that's the difficulty with adult children. As I think I said before, they can vote with their feet. They don't have to see you. If they get fed up with you, or the relationship gets difficult, then they don't have to be with you. So I think I wasn't so prepared for the kind of it's more subtle as they get older. You feel you have all these mixed feelings. So you want to pursue your own life, but you want to support them. You're not quite sure how to support them. You're not sure if you should be supporting them, because should they be just standing on their own 2 feet? Are you mollycoddling them? So there's all these dilemmas. So I think it's a bit more subtle as after they leave home and when they're adult. Although, of course, there are crises, and I do talk a lot about the different crises in my book, like mental ill health, which is obviously rising. There's a mother in my book whose son started having psychotic episodes when he was 28. He's 35 now. And, eating disorders. There's a mum with a daughter who developed an eating disorder in her 20s. So all those things, the teenage years are passing, whereas these things are serious, lasting things that you have to deal with if you have issues like that. So, and of course, then there's things like, if you get divorced or if your child gets divorced, I mean, that's a whole, there are all of these things. And I think when you've got younger children, you just don't even think about all that stuff.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, that you don't really, when you're not faced with it, it doesn't sort of come up, so you don't have to deal with it. And that's sort of what my dad was saying this morning. He goes, you haven't had to deal with any of us parents passing away. Ali's parents are still alive. My brother's partner's parents are all still alive. My sister's husband's parents are still alive. I had to get all that right in my head. He lost his mum when he was 36 or something like that. And I remember that. I was 10 when that happened. And he said, what I found was that you kids helped me through the passing of my mum. And how important that was to him at the time. And he said, obviously it's going to come in a rush probably for you guys because we're all going to get older. But it's really that generational thing that does assist.
Yeah, I think that's a big role reversal often. I mean, I think you often find that when a parent dies, the adult child supports the other parent and perhaps doesn't have the space or to grieve themselves, and so they have to kind of wait. They have to put their own grieving on hold often because the other parent often really needs their support. And I think quite often people expect the child to support them. It's a kind of expected role. There is a woman in my book whose husband died when he was 56 of a brain tumour, and she now looks back and says, you get so selfish, it's just all me, you don't have the bandwidth to think about it. But she says, looking back, she can see that, her kids she had 4 children, and they were more affected than, in a way, than she was, because she said, you've only got one dad, and nobody will ever replace this wonderful man in their lives. So there's so many layers to these crises that happen in our lives, and as a parent, it is very hard to think about your adult child at the same time as what you're going through. I think it's the same with divorce as well. I think if you're going through a divorce or a crisis in your marriage, it's very difficult. Your child will be suffering too. If you're getting divorced, but you haven't got the bandwidth to think about them.
You've got some amazing stories in the book from other parents, and one in particular about a mother who says that the emptiness years were actually easy. It's what came after that. So it keeps on going, like as we parent, all the challenges. What are some of the issues that come up once your child marries someone and has children?
Well, it depends. If you like the person they're married That's okay, but it's still, you're still likely to have mixed feelings. I mean, if you don't like the person they've married, then I think you just have to keep your mouth shut and hope your body language doesn't give you away. And,
That's pretty hard, though.
Yes. Yeah.
Just when you're turning away from them at the table or not pouring them a wine. Bring your own wine.
But I think, I think you have mixed feelings because obviously, I think a lot of research shows that relationships with adult children become less intense. You have less contact with an adult child once they marry. That's quite sad. And one thing a lot of parents say is that you don't get to see them on their own. You usually see them with their partner. And that is quite a sad thing. And you can kind of engineer it, but that's quite hard without, offending your new daughter or son-in-law. Yeah. So, I think it makes a big difference to your relationship with your child, and it can be very enriching. I've got 2 sons who are married, and having two daughters-in-law, it's a great way of communicating with my sons in a way. It's it's added a new dimension. They're more, girls tend to be they're much better at remembering birthdays for a start, and things like Mother's Day. So they remind your son. So there's all these kind of good things that happen. And then when they've got kids, there's a kind of new respect. But I have to say that, speaking for myself, when my sons had babies, I mean, it was amazing that your babies had a baby. Yeah. I think Rolling Stone Keith Richards said something about that. It's just mind-boggling. You get this kind of new respect, and I think they respect you more. And of course, they hopefully want your support. And if you can give it in the right way, without being a sort of kind of interfering granny, I think it's another way of the relationship is enriched. It keeps. I think that's what I'm thinking about now as I'm talking. That as kids get older, the relationship between you gets richer and richer as all of these new things come into your life, whether it's a new partner or whatever. And I think you have to be quite sort of empathetic towards the new partner. Think that it's difficult for them. Think about what it was like when you were an in-law and you were meeting. Just try and put yourself in their shoes. Remember, it's not easy joining a family.
My mother's, my mother's best tip for anyone, her best piece of parenting advice, and she always tells me this, is you have to find something to like about your child's partner. Because what happens if you don't, you ostracize your child as well. And that's, that's what you don't want. So she's like, try to find something that you like about them. That's really important. And I think back on all of my relationships and my sister's relationships, and she did that. She always found something to like, sometimes too much. Sometimes we were like, wait, I broke up with him and you still like him, but I remember that piece of advice, and it's really gone a long way in meeting the partners of our kids to make sure that partner feels welcome into the family, because even if it's for a short time or a long time, I think it's actually a really important part of creating a comfort zone for our child as well as the partner, And I would imagine too, Celia, that there must be conflict. I know there was a couple of bumps in the road for us with particularly my parents, when the way we began to raise our children was different to the way I was raised. So I can imagine that must cause a lot of oh, hang on a minute, oh gosh, why are you doing that with your child? That's not what we did with you. So is that also a point of conflict that you found with parents and their grandchildren, I guess?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really difficult, because I think you have to leave it up to the parents, the new parents, to decide how they bring up their kids. But that's really difficult to step back when, because they've got all these weird ways of doing things, like, getting them to sleep or not sleep, or potty training, whatever it happens to be. There's all these kind of, there's bound to be disagreements. You're bound to not agree with the way that the next generation of parents are doing things. Yeah. And I think it's it's best to try not to give advice unless it's asked, and I think that goes across the board with adult children actually. But I think when it comes to parenting, it's so sensitive. You know how sensitive you are, especially when you've got a baby. I think it's very easy to feel that you're being criticised, and I think parents of my generation have to be aware of that and not keep saying, "Oh well, in my day we did, we fed them whatever we did, or we made them sleep through the night, or we didn't do that." Or I think that can come across as criticism, or it can just come across as a bit interfering. So I think it's best to just stand back, unless you feel they're doing something dangerous. I think it's better to just bite your lip, stand back, be helpful in the best ways you can, which is just basically being there and helping in whatever way they want you to help. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
But it is. It's difficult.
Yeah, pick your moments and read the room. It's probably not a great time to be advising your child on how to change the diaper when you've got to poo up the back and that sort of stuff.
Exactly.
Of the kid you're trying to change. This is how we used to do it. It's like, back off, back away.
Exactly. Yeah.
Adult children are living longer these days with their parents. I moved out when I was 18. Ali did the same. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's a detriment that children are staying longer at home?
I don't. I think it's positive, actually. Obviously, there's all kinds of reasons why kids stay at home, and a lot of them to do with economics and, they can't afford their own place. But I think they also benefit hugely from that ongoing support from their parents. There's an adult child in my book describes it as a safety net. He said it was really important to him to have that safety net.
Yep.
After he left uni, actually moved back home for a bit. And I think it's a really good opportunity to get to know each other as adults, as long as you don't do everything for them.
Yep.
Like, I really don't think you should be even doing their cooking. I think they should be pulling their weight in the house. They should do their own laundry. I think if you can live independent lives, obviously that's very difficult if you're living in the same house, but if you can be quite independent and expect them to do all the stuff they'd be doing if they were living separately in their own place, and if they have some understanding of how much things cost and all of that, and getting the plumber in and all of those boring things you have to do, then I think it's really beneficial. And I think the relationship probably gets stronger once they have left, because you've got to know them in this, and they respect you more. I think they see what you're doing, and in a way that perhaps they can't when they're teenagers. I think living together as adults is a really positive thing, I think. As long as it doesn't go on too long, and I think it's good to set a time limit if you which you can review, but you don't want to feel it's going to, you don't really want to feel they're going to be living with you when they're 40, I don't think.
Yeah. We've got quite a few friends with kids that are, bumping up 22, 23, sort of that age. And we've often had that conversation is, when do you start to ask them to pay rent? Like at what age, at what point do you ask them to chip in on the house rent or the mortgage? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think this is very funny because everybody says, "Oh, you should get them to pay rent." I think I've met one parent who charges their child rent. I've interviewed a lot of parents over the years, and I'm afraid I didn't either. So I think in some families, again, culturally, in some families, it's really kind of not even thought of that you would charge your child rent, and it's quite a difficult thing to do. But I think although I didn't do it, I really think you should, because it keeps it real. It's even if you come to some agreement about a contribution, it just keeps the whole thing on a realistic basis, and it stops parents worrying that a lot of parents worry about making their kids' lives too cozy if they live at home.
Right.
And should there be a bit more tough love? Well, if you charge them rent or a contribution, then that sort of eases that concern, because they are having, they can't spend all their money on beer or whatever it is.
Well, you're preaching to the converted with us, because we do charge our kids rent.
Oh, right.
Yeah, we did it.
Good.
I mean, it's a nominal fee.
Yeah.
But I was told many years ago for something else. Actually, it was to get some acting lessons from a guy that I was actually working with at the time, and he said to me, for this to work, there needs to be an exchange. So I was paying him $20 to teach me Shakespeare. And I was fine paying. I thought it was great, but it just taught me something. There has to be an exchange. And once the kids get to a certain age, they're in uni, they've got a job. Basically, that's what we did, wasn't it, honey? When the kids
Once
were working,
they started earning money,
yeah. And then it was like, okay, well, here's what we need, and this is another one that worked for us. They had to cook one night a week and buy the food for that meal. So it worked out really well, and we made a bit of a game of it too. Actually, we had a point system on the blackboard, and it was basically rate them out of 10, rate the meal out of 10. Whoever got the highest amount of points got to choose what the takeout was on Friday night. And
that's brilliant.
It actually worked really well. And so now Lotus has moved out, and River's partner moved with her. That now we're down to, that's what Ali said early on, that we are in the beginnings of this empty nest phase, and it's kind of weird. Like, Lotus will come over for dinner on Sunday night, and I'm now feeling like when I go to visit my mum and dad, and I walk into their house, and Dad's like, "Yeah, you want a bicky and cheese? Want a beer?" And I'm doing that with Lotus. I'm like, and then just questions.
Yeah.
And she's like,
It's
back off. She
exciting.
goes and sits in her same seat on the couch.
Yeah.
Looks at her phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, she just wants to come home and chill out and just
Exactly
be
right.
back being a kind of a child again.
Yep.
Yeah.
Maybe, she just wants everything. I think kids come back and they just want to just like, coming home is like the place you can just be yourself.
I don't think that's
Always.
ever changed. I do that with my folks now too. They've got a fire burning, and it's like, and Mum's like, I've got chops cooking or whatever, and it just feels so nice.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you can be that to your kids, I think that's, if they can just feel that you're there, I think that's really important.
And when it is that visit too, it just feels really lovely to, for her to fall into, a relaxed state, because as you say, it is so all brand new. It is so all, there's so many things that they're learning as a new renter, and all the prices, and learning how to budget. And, as we've spoken about this before with her, she's very challenged with anxiety. So we've been, when you were talking about when to step in, when not to step in, we've sort of been watching her from afar, just going, how is she doing with this? She's stressed at work. She's stressed at home a little bit right now. And, so we've got our eyes on her, but it's also but it's this massive growth for her at the same time. She's doing all these brave things, which is so exciting, but the anxiety is also really, really high too. So we haven't stepped in, but we're definitely got our eyes on her.
I think that is kind of at the crux of what's difficult, especially in their 20s, but it goes on that you've kind of got an eye on them. You've still got that very primeval protectiveness.
Yes.
And you kind of also got a sixth sense when things aren't quite right, and if they've had problems in the past with whatever, anxiety or an eating disorder or drinking too much or whatever, you've got your kind of antennae are kind of on alert all the time, and it's very hard to relax, actually. I think that's why you're only ever as happy as your least happy child, because you're always kind of thinking about them and worrying about them, and of course, a parent's worry is very irritating to a child. They don't, they don't want you to be irritated. They don't want your worry as well as their own. They don't.
What do you do with? I mean, were your sons like that? I mean, do they still? You said they're in their 30s now. You must have had them when you were 12. Did you, I mean,
Thank you.
Do you still have that going on in your, I mean, you've got all this wisdom now and all this knowledge around it, though as a mum to a son who's 30, how do you stop yourself?
I can't stop myself. I've always got my kind of, even though things are pretty good with them now, I would say, in their 20s, things, weren't always, you've got your eye out for, say, stress at work, because obviously kids now are very overstressed at work. You've always got your eye out for that little thing that went wrong in the past, or, you're thinking, oh, I do hope things are okay in their relationships. I hope they're not doing, I hope they're not working too hard. Yeah, I don't think that ever stops. I don't think you ever stop worrying about them. I heard a 92-year-old guy the other day saying, he was trying to think of good things about getting older. And he said, well, one of the good things is that you don't worry about the kids quite so much. Well, his kids must have been in their 70s, so 60s.
You'd hope
so, I don't think you ever do, but in my own experience, it certainly gets easier. I think the 20s, the 20s are a difficult time, I think, now to find your place in the world, for kids to find their place in the world. But then, of course, God forbid, if my sons were to get divorced, or if there was some illness or something, then you're straight back in there. You're straight back in parent mode.
Yeah, that's right.
And everything. My kids had a terrible house fire. They were sharing a house together. That phone call comes, and you are straight back into that being a parent.
Yeah.
Whatever else is going on in your life, you're straight back, and all your focus is on them and supporting them.
Yeah, I suppose you've answered my question about how do you stop, and it's probably that's an instinctual thing, and it's very difficult to. Why would you want to stop an instinctual thing? I guess it's more about just be aware of it and respond accordingly.
I was going to say I will never stop, and I don't want to stop, because that's been my greatest joy has been the kids. So, you're a mother till the day you die. So, I guess as Celia's saying, it's just how you adapt and change to the needs and wants of an adult child, which is what your whole book is about. So, which is such a fascinating topic.
Thank you. Yeah, I found it was amazing talking to all these different parents and, about their experiences. And, it's so interesting hearing all the kind of mixed feelings that people have. They express it so well. It's very good to hear from people's own voices, what it's like, the dilemmas they go through and the difficulties they have. I've found it really helped me, because I was looking for clues myself. And then obviously talking to psychologists and psychotherapists and so on, who really kind of echo a lot of what's said, but give really solid advice. And I found that really helpful myself.
Celia, you've written a great book, All Grown Up, Nurturing Relationships with Adult Children. Thank you so much for your time. You can probably go and have breakfast now that we've woken you up so early in London. But this was so interesting and really helpful for me personally. As you know, as we've been mentioning, we've got our adult children. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you. It's been so lovely to be with you. It's really great. It's really, really lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Celia.
That was a surprise. That was such a topic, close to my heart, and one that we have never discussed, and also one that I had never really thought about the challenges in adult children and parents' lives. Like I kind of go, oh, well, if it's been a difficult relationship the whole way through, then it might be a difficult adult relationship, but it can be a great relationship while they're at home. And then it can start to unravel once they move out, because of all the changes that the adult child is going through, which is so true. We hit some pretty big traumas sometimes as we get older, and what that means for our parents, and if we've got kids and if the grandchild is having a traumatic time. I know my dad worries about everything. Still with his 3 daughters and his all of his grandkids. You know, he will never not be a worrying father.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's like what we touched on is that we tend not as humans not to look at things until we are in the midst of it.
In there, yeah, that's right.
And so this is something that I know, well, we're starting to consider it now because Lotus has left home and Riv's not far away, and, you know, we're with Bodes and suddenly there's 3 of us in the house. And, you know, in a decade there'll be just us and the dogs. So, yeah, it's...
And your golf clubs.
It's an interesting thing. And also, I don't really think about from the parent's perspective, but watching a child, especially when they're going through like the years of 26, 27, 28, which a lot of people have massive occurrences in their lives, and how that is difficult not to insert yourself into their life.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel that now. I mean, Lotus has only been out of the house for a couple of months.
A bit longer.
And it's just, I don't know, it's just... I want to talk to her every day like I used to when she was here. I want to hear about her day. I want to know how she's feeling, you know, and it's like, just hold on. She'll let you know what she wants to share and what she wants to talk about. And so I find myself, you know, needing to sort of put the reins on pull on the reins a little bit for myself because we have been, I mean, we are super close, but we were really close when she lived with us as well. We spent a lot of time together talking. Yeah. So
what we didn't touch on with Celia was potential jealousy that happens between a husband or between parents when the child who's left home rings and only rings one of the parents.
Are you speaking from experience?
Yes. She only calls you.
Right.
Right? I mean, she called me the other day because she stacked her car.
Yeah.
But
yeah, well, that's always been our relationship.
Yeah, I know.
So,
I get that, but I'm just saying that all those things that you've just described, going, I miss her. You know, when you've said all that, I do too.
Mm.
And so when, you know, I hear you guys talking, and I'm like, do I Buttinsky here? Do I go into the room as well? No, she's just rung Elle, sort of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of dynamics that come into play.
And certainly you can call her. It's just, I think, it's not always calling her to offer advice.
But I don't.
Mm.
I don't. How do you know why? You don't know why I'm calling her. I just ring up to say g'day.
Okay.
Okay, some advice might pop in. That's the dad fix-it thing.
Yes,
you know?
That is the dad fix-it thing.
That's a hard one to walk away from. But, you know, I do it as gently as I possibly can.
I know.
Use every third word. Use your heart. You are hard. Hey, thank you so much for being with us this week on Separate Bathrooms. Celia's book, again, is called All Grown Up, Nurturing Relationships with Adult Children.
That's right. All right. Thanks so much for listening. See you later.